Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, my name is Amir Hussein and I like to give tips and advice for the research life here on this channel. And today is actually no exception because in this PhD 101 episode, I'll be talking about my 5 biggest mistakes I made in my PhD. So hopefully you don't have to make them in whichever part of your journey you are in your research life, whether you're in your undergrad, master's, PhD, or even postdoc. A lot of these lessons that I learned from my biggest mistakes hopefully can help you. So without further ado, let's get cracking. And just before I do, just a quick comment and reminder, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. The subscribe button's over there if you can, so you don't miss out on these weekly PhD 101 episodes and little bonus videos I do on Thursday. But I shall stop talking and I shall start talking about my mistake. So number 1 is by far something you have heard me talk about if you follow me on Instagram. Again, if you haven't followed me on Instagram, please do so, where I talk about this why and how strategy. And the biggest mistake I made in my PhD is I knew what to do. So I knew what experiment I needed to do. I knew what it meant. I knew what I needed to do next week, week after. But I didn't know why and how these techniques work. I didn't know why I had to add this reagent or this chemical. I didn't know why or how it made a difference to the experiment. I might have known maybe like 20 or 30%. But somebody came around and asked me, it's like, what is the purpose of this? Why are you adding this? How does this work? I probably will struggle a lot. And a lot of people, myself included, when I did my PhD, that you try and figure out the why and how towards the end, but you very easily forget it because you haven't ingrained that very early on. So if you watch any part of this video, you can just watch this and then skip if you need to, because this is definitely my biggest mistake and probably the biggest lesson I can give in terms of my failures, which is whenever you're learning any, whether it's statistical analysis, how to interview somebody, experiments in the lab, how to deal with people, what chemicals, reagents, cells, animal work, whatever it is you do, what machines you use, understand why and how you do every single part of the steps in your protocol. Why do you need to add this? How does that change the experiment? Why do you analyze the data this way and not that way? How does it work? I'll badger on this for decades if I have to, because it's just a big part of understanding your research. And so I strongly urge for any of you who's watching this video, whenever you're doing any research, understand the why and the how element of each step that you do, and hopefully that will be helpful for you going along. It goes from when you start your undergrad to even your viva, because as I mentioned in previous videos, as you can see here, you will get tested on why you did something and how you did something. So if you already know the why and how, it makes life a lot easier. So keep that in mind, so you don't make mistakes I did. So number 2 is all about statistics. Now, if you were to do a self-audit, and something else I talk about as well on this channel about being self-aware, researching yourself, I talk about it a lot, researching yourself. And I know when I was doing my PhD that presenting was one of my strengths, that I enjoy talking. It's why I do these videos. But I realized that I didn't give statistical analysis as much importance as I should have. It's still a weakness of mine in terms of like getting my head around things. To give you an idea of how, you can say how frustrated I was with statistics in my A levels, so your kind of qualifications you do before university here in the UK, I chose to do mechanics in my mathematical modules as opposed to statistics. And had I done that, it would have made life a lot easier for me going along. But at the time when you're young, your head's not screwed on properly, I was like, I don't want to do stats. What's the point? What's the importance? Now it's such a key part of anything that I do. Any form of research I do, there is analysis. Whether it's chi-square test, t-test, post-hoc t-tests, Turkey-Kramer t-test, these variations, one-way ANOVAs, two-way ANOVAs, chi-squared, and A, B, C, D, E, F, G, element of P test you can do in statistical analysis. So I urge you to not make the mistake I did, where give statistical analysis a huge importance in your learning when you're doing your research. Being able to understand how does these tests work. So then when you're doing them, you can figure out, okay, what are the errors and then how you can change it or optimize it. Because the biggest advantage of learning or knowing a lot more statistical analysis is you can analyze your data in several different ways to yield different results and perceptions and discussions. If I have this group of data and I only know how to analyze it in one way, I can only extract one type of interpretation. But If I know from being more competent in analysis, I can say, right, this group of data can also be done through that way, also that way, and that way. And we can actually understand different viewpoints of what that data is showing us. So whether it's qualitative data, whether it's quantitative data, whatever it is, if it's even coding, there are always different ways to analyze the same set of data. So the more you are aware of that, the more beneficial it's going to be for you in the long run. And when you're writing your theses or your papers, you can look at, right, if I visualize the data in this way, there's these 3-4 different analyses that I could do. And it kind of gives you more justification and more confidence in understanding your data, because you know the analysis and the significance behind it through statistical analysis. Number 3 is all about digitization. And what I mean by that is, I am very nostalgic in terms of having, the whole lab book that's really thick, there's papers falling around. Actually, hold on, I'm going to show you. So, this is my lab book for my postdoc at the moment in respiratory pharmacology. Now, that looks very disorganized. I've got papers falling around, I've got, all this. I'm not going to move it, otherwise it's going to fall everywhere, right? That looks like a mess, doesn't it? However, I know where everything is per se, and a lot of research in the older days, this was kind of iconic. This was kind of a measure of how much work you're doing. But nowadays, with the uses of cloud storage, Notion, OneDrive, OneNote as well, having them is very important, because then you can track everything since day one. You can't lose anything because it's on a digital computer and it's cloud-based. And 2, it is a lot easier to search for something than sifting through those papers you just saw earlier. Now, although I'm used to that, I'm trying to move to even more digitization. Don't wait for me. Start now. Use Notion, but many people have used Notion for templates, and there's tons across the internet on YouTube and Instagram by using these databases to make digital lab books, right? And the reason why I say start now, even for your learning, is it's not just about keeping everything in one place. It's about the speed in identifying something that you did 3-4 years ago. You can just type a keyword and it'll pop up, right? That's what I did. However, if you're trying to find something I did 3 years ago, I have to sift through hours and hours of lab work and lab books, try and find that particular document. So digitization and using databases like Notion and OneNote speed up the whole process. Even when you're putting things together, you can collate things, copy and paste the text, don't have to write it out again. Calculations and templates for your calculations, you can use Microsoft Excel. So you just bung in the numbers and then you got your value that you need for your next part of your experiment. So you can automate things. Having the notion of making things autonomous in your research speeds up the process. So one of the postdocs that I'm learning from, who's incredible in terms of how he automates things, makes life a lot easier, because if you're doing large parts of information, whether you're transcribing a lot or whether you're generating a lot of RNA in your extraction with your cells, being able to autonomize the values that you get speeds up you doing the next experiment. So why is that important? You can then do more experiments in a certain day, because you're not spending hours writing things up, calculating things, because you've got, even use a dictaphone, for example, talk about the work that you did and then allow it to transcribe and then change the words. It's all about speeding up the process, and digitization of certain elements in your workflow, for example, speeds up the process, so you have more time to do other things. And to be fair, you have more time to just relax, because you've been more efficient and more effective. Efficiency and effectiveness are very important for your research. And I think digitization is very, very important, because a friend of mine once said, very statement I always live by now, is use technology, don't let technology use you. Now, number 4 is all about using external sources to help learn and understand things. Now, even though I didn't do my PhD in the 1940s and 50s where there's no computers, I did mine a few years ago. So YouTube was very prominent, Instagram was very prominent, ResearchGate, other external courses. But I was in such a bubble that I wasn't aware of the actual repertoire of resources that are out there if you're struggling to understand something. So for example, let's say I did a lot of Western blot work, so a lot of proteomic work towards the end of my PhD. Now, had I looked at more YouTube videos, more spoke to people through Instagram, which I'm doing a lot more now, looking on ResearchGate, I would have sped up the process to understand that technique and would have built up more confidence. Now I'm using Instagram very heavily for sharing my advices and sharing tips, but I'm also using Instagram to learn from others. I'm using flow cytometry now as a new technique for me. And because of the joy of social media, because of the power of social media, if it is used in the right way, I can now contact people who are in Germany and Australia and Canada and even the US who are then helping me to understand certain parts. And even people who are closer to home, like who are just in a different city, doing a PhD or even doing masters and they're learning a particular area. You can actually have conversations with them. You can share your advice with them, they can share yours. So now there's so many avenues to help learn something that you are struggling on, whether through YouTube. I learned how to do this, like make videos and all of this through YouTube and through talking to people. But because of now social media, there's even more access to speak to people who are even experts in the area that you can just DM and say, you know, I'm struggling on this. I'm wondering if I can have maybe 10 minutes of your time just to talk about X, Y, and Z. You can do that now. And that's something I didn't utilize enough. And that was nothing to do with technology. It was my fault, my mistakes. Now, many people would have said, because of everything that you went through. Now, if you don't know what I went through in my PhD, the videos over here, that people would say, oh, it would have been understandable because you were so busy and so inundated. But that's not true either. You know? And I think a lot of these courses and webinars and series and videos and guides are out there to help you understand. You know, and I think that's something I really regret not making use of. So make sure you do in terms of making use of these resources. Now, the last and by far the biggest mistake I made was I kept making excuses. Now, I could think of every excuse in the book to try and avoid doing something that was very long and arduous. So I would spend weeks and months trying to find shortcuts because I didn't want to do that bit. And this was in my medicinal chemistry part of my PhD, where to purify these compounds takes time. You have to do certain techniques called column chromatography. Just to give you an example, now you may not understand that, but it was a process that's time consuming, it's boring. It's the best way, but it's just really long-winded. And in my more slightly insecure, not as driven as I am now type of person when I was many years ago, I kept thinking, right, let me see, can I do it this way? Can I do it that way? Can I do it that way? And all the time I spent trying to find shortcuts and making excuses, I could have done the work in half the time and kind of cracked on. I didn't face the problem head on. And because of that lack of confidence in myself, that belief in myself, it really hindered my progress for the rest of the lab work that I wanted to do. So because I was making excuses, I forgot to see the bigger picture of all the other things that I would need to do in my PhD to get more data out, to then publish during my PhD, which I wasn't able to. So my advice to you in this part is, if you are making excuses, retrospectively look at yourself and understand why. Why are you making these excuses? Could you focus on the actual solutions? So I could now, if I was going back and say, trial and error, even if it goes wrong and something breaks and I lose the compound, it doesn't matter. Because I need to understand how to do this, because there are times when nobody is going to be there to help you in the lab. Or when you're doing coding, your supervisors might not be available, other people might be busy, and you have to make a decision there and then, because your experiment is time sensitive. That's where you got to grab it by the scruff of the neck and have a try. If you fail, that's fine, because at least you had a go. And now, as I mentioned in the fourth mistake, you can utilize YouTube videos, you can utilize resources and other types of, even like TikTok videos and Twitter. You'll find so much information and resources on how to do something. And that can give you some motivation. But you also have to remember, it is down to you. Now, I mentioned in a separate video on having that drive and that relentless attitude to pursue research, to get through when you're facing difficulties. And when you see yourself making excuses, you got to change the perspective. I did an Instagram series on this called Life Lessons from my PhD. You can see here. But I talked about perspective and talked about that drive. You've got to balance that notion of, right, hold on. I'm making these excuses because this takes too long, or I don't feel I'm capable. If you didn't feel you're capable, imagine all the other things that you thought you didn't do, but you do now. Like many people didn't know they could drive, but they're driving now. They didn't thought they would do a master's, now they're doing a PhD. There are these times where you start to realize there's a lack of self-belief. And when you see yourself making excuses, the biggest and by far easiest way is focus on solutions. Can you do a practice version of the thing that you're struggling with? Can you have somebody later on just to see you for 10 minutes and say, I'm going to have a go. Can you tell me if I'm doing it right or wrong? Even if you're doing it on your own. The biggest thing is to get out of your comfort zone. And a lot of the times when you're making excuses because you are in your comfort zone. So towards the end of the PhD, I had to make a decision with myself. Nobody else was around. Supervisors are not going to be there to spoon feed you. They're not going to be postdocs around to help you along the way. There will come a time when you have to decide. And I said, right, I'm making a mission for the next few weeks. I'm going to learn this technique no matter how many times I have to do it. I want to do it in a way that doesn't cost much money, in the sense I'm not using expensive resources. I'm going to have a try. I'm going to have a try. I'm going to even mimic it doing it, even without using anything. I'm going to do it that's using the kind of thin air until I get it right. And even writing. They said use the example of thesis writing. You're making an excuse of, sorry, I'll do it later, I'll do it later. I mentioned in the previous video about the notion of gratitude. There are many people who would love to be in your position if you're doing a PhD, masters, or even undergrad. So use that as a driver. You got to look back at what you did before and use that as a driver to understand, right, I have to push through, because there would be a million other people who would love to be in my position. I will be working at this day and night to get it ready. I'm just here making excuses. Stop making excuses and make solutions. Drive through solutions. And believe me, you'll start to get that a lot better. You know, and if you're struggling, if you are making excuses and you're worried about supervisor problems or this, just have a chat with me. Genuinely, no issues, no cost, nothing. Just have a chat with me. DM me on amir.phd or have an email with me on amir@researchtribe.org, and I'll be happy to help. Because this is something I know hindered me massively, and I well and truly do not want anybody to have that notion where spending weeks and weeks and months making excuses, sometimes understandably, but it's hindering their progress. So I urge you, genuinely, I'm putting my hands out there, please, if you're struggling, just have a chat with me and I hope I can help. Because the last thing I want to leave you with this part of this video is, there's a statement in my PhD which you'll see here. The link into my PhD thesis is in the description box as well. We all have a potential that far exceeds what our minds can imagine. What we lack is the belief that we have it and the desire to utilize it. We all have an innate potential. I was born with speech and listening difficulties, and I'm now talking to you in a YouTube video after shooting 53 videos in the past 2 years. Clearly I had the potential. I had to have that belief in myself. So I urge you to find it within yourself, start to realize who you are capable of, because you have more potential. I believe in you. You have an innate potential that you can't even imagine. But you have to start believing in yourself first in order to tap into it. But I think that will conclude today's PhD 101 episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it beneficial. There are many more mistakes I made, but I thought these were the best to share in terms of kind of lessons and values that you can take from it. So hopefully you minimize and even potentially not make the mistakes that I did. And like I said, if you've got any questions, leave me down in the comments below. Do subscribe if you can. Hit a like, that will be super beneficial. And I hope you see you next week for another PhD 101 episode. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Stay tuned and I'll see you soon.